Hi, it's Steph, and today I thought that I would take you along for a little bit of gardening maintenance and motivation. Well, I have lots of things to get done in the garden today. Some weeding, some deadheading. I have a couple of seedlings that I need to get into the ground, and I desperately need to clean my bird bath. So I thought that I would just show you how I go about doing these things in the garden. And I know that right now, the summer, it's a little bit difficult to get motivated to get out in the garden. So what I did was I noticed that it was a bit cooler this morning and it's still really early. And so I thought that I would get in here and get after some things before it gets too warm. So yeah, let's go ahead and do some garden work. The first task of the day was to change out and clean my bird bath. I change out the water about once a week, but the bird bath itself gets pretty grimy because it's in full sun. It tends to build a lot of algae and it gets this yucky brown film on it. So about once a month or so, I do have to go through and give it a deep cleaning. The best way that I've found to do this is by using a little bit of dish soap. I like to use Dawn, and because it's safe for ducks and wildlife, I thought that they would be pretty benign and useful for my bird bath, and it works really well. Of course, a little elbow grease is definitely needed, so I get in there with some brushes and I scrub all of that brown algae off. It is important to rinse the bird bath really well after you've put the soap in there because it'll get sudsy for quite a bit. So I think I end up rinsing it out half a dozen times or so before I refill it. Now my fountain is solar powered because the area that I have it located in my patio flower bed, I don't have power there. So I was able to find this fountain on Amazon about 3 years ago now. And I really love it. I can't find the exact model, but in my Amazon storefront, which I always have the link for below the video in the description area, I did link a couple of other similar fountains that are also solar powered. It's really lightweight, which also makes it really easy to empty out and refill. But the birds really love this fountain, and I find them visiting it quite often. I found this product called Fountec, which is a algaecide and clarifier that works really well to keep the algae at bay. It's safe for birds, but you're not supposed to use it if you have fish. And I use about 2 drops, and how much you use is going to depend on the size of your fountain, how much water, etc. So I will also link that in the description area below the video. Once we get through July, I find that the garden starts looking a bit tired and in need of a little maintenance. So I usually rejuvenate the garden by deadheading and weeding and just cleaning things up. Here I'm cleaning up some Shasta daisies that are finished blooming, and I don't think they were getting enough water in this spot because I had a few stems that were pretty dry. So what I did was I took some of the seed heads on my Shasta daisies and I sprinkled the seeds around, and I'm hoping that this will give me some more Shasta daisy baby plants. My double pink knockout roses are also on their second flush now, and I continue to go through and clean them up once in a while to keep them fresh and putting out new buds. Pretty soon I will stop deadheading them as the shrub starts getting ready for dormancy, and it's good to stop deadheading them a couple of months before your last frost date. Deadheading perennials is a great way to keep them producing more flowers. When you deadhead a perennial, you just want to follow the stem down to a set of leaves and cut the bloom off or the stem off. And this will keep your plant producing more blooms instead of signaling it to produce seed and go into dormancy. Anytime that I work with my roses, I disinfect my pruners or my snips. I do that by just keeping a small bottle of isopropyl alcohol in my apron or in my pocket, and I spray them before I begin cutting and before I move on to a different rose bush or shrub, because you don't want to spread disease between shrubs. Here on my front walkway, I have quite a few groupings of white swan coneflowers, and I started these from seed about 3 years ago. The first year I just got foliage, and then last year was the second year I got some beautiful blooms, and this year in year 3 they're even larger and taller than in years past. The only thing that I find is that because they are so tall, on average about 36 inches in height, the wind, which we get a lot of in this area, really knocks them over. So I recently ordered some supports on Amazon that I think will be really helpful. I'll put a link to those below in case you also have some plants that could use a little bit of support. But I find that deadheading these keeps new blooms coming. Now, subsequent blooming isn't as prolific as the first flush of blooms, but it is still a great way to get some fresh flowers on your plant. Now, this cheery little group of Rudbeckia that you see here popped up this year out of nowhere. I used to have Rudbeckia planted in this bed, but decided I didn't want yellow in my front beds and removed it and placed them in the back garden near my veggie garden in my pollinator bed. Well, isn't it funny that this year these popped up here and my tastes have changed, and now I absolutely love the pop of golden yellow at this point in the season. Because the nights are getting a little cooler, it's starting to feel a bit more like we're heading into fall. I know, you summer lovers are probably going to be upset with me for saying that word, fall, but I'm finding that I'm really loving the golden color of the Rudbeckia this year. So it is really funny how our tastes change. And here I am removing all of the sticks from my daylilies that are now spent and done. These are really easy to just lift and pull out once they start getting to this point where they're really dry. I am going to work on digging up all of these daylilies in my front bed over the next couple of weeks. I've decided that I no longer want them there, and I'll open up some space for some new things. Now here I'm getting ready to pull this large plant, which is actually an imposter. I thought it was larkspur the last 2 garden tours that I had, and I kept waiting for this thing to bloom, and it didn't. Turns out it's a huge weed. So I finally got around to pulling it out, and things just look a lot cleaner in that spot now. It sure fooled me for quite some time. Isn't it funny how we can grow weeds this size that look so beautiful and healthy, but the little plants that we try to nurture and put into our garden don't even get nearly that big? I always find that incredible. If only the perennials and plants that we want to grow could grow as quickly as our weeds grow and multiply. So here I am going through and just cleaning some of these weeds that have started to pop up all around the beds, the flower beds. I never really got around to doing a full mulching this year. I've just been kind of mulching things as I go along. And so finally here, the cardboard and newspaper, paper grocery bags that I use as an underlayment underneath the mulch has started to break down, so it's giving weeds an opportunity to pop up now. But I actually find pulling weeds kind of therapeutic. And while it's something that sometimes I have a hard time getting around to making time to do, I actually quite enjoy it. While the before can seem really daunting, the after is always so satisfying. Here's some of that Amore purple salvia that I started from seed. It's a shorter stature type salvia, but it's starting to bloom. And my Luna hibiscus is also now starting to bloom and looking really pretty. In my back patio bed, I had to go through and also deadhead some more perennials. In this area, I just cleaned up some of my coneflowers and this yarrow, which is now past its prime. This is one of those perennials that the first flush is definitely gorgeous, and then the subsequent flush will be just a few sporadic blooms. But I thought that I would go through and clean this up to see if we still have some time to get some more pretty blooms out of this gorgeous yarrow. This bed is looking pretty tired at this point now that I've deadheaded some of these coneflowers in the front and the yarrow, but I do have some zinnias planted in there that I'm hoping will pick up the show as we transition into the cooler part of summer and into the fall. This bed here is in desperate need of some mulch, but shortly I will be planting some boxwoods in the front of it. I also have a grass that I plan on planting there. So once I'm done with the changes I'll be making to that bed, I will go ahead and add a fresh layer of mulch. So these shed beds here, because this side with the limelight, the little limes, is pretty thickly planted, I don't get too many weeds, but in the corners where it's exposed, I will get some. And that's the thing, if we don't plant every inch of our soil, Mother Nature will go ahead and put something there in the way of weeds. My containers also needed some attention, and these geraniums that I overwintered were doing really well. And when I was away on my trip a few weeks back, they had gotten really grown out, and so they needed some cleanup. So I went through and I deadheaded them. I also gave them a little bit of fish emulsion fertilizer. And these just, as long as you keep deadheading them, I find that geraniums just keep blooming and blooming throughout the whole summer. And for me, they've been super easy to overwinter. I literally just take the pot, stick them in a window in my basement, and I will water them maybe once every couple of weeks. I'll give them a tiny little drink of water, but because they're in dormancy, they probably don't even need water. But I actually just give them a little sip and they do fine. Come spring, I give them some fertilizer, put them outside, and they bounce back beautifully. These nasturtiums that I have planted as trailers in these pots just wasn't doing well. Nasturtium likes a moist, well-draining soil and a bit cooler temperatures and a little bit of shade. I find they do best in part shade. Now these containers were in the sun, and the only containers that I had to use as liners for these pots this year were a little small. So they didn't hold as much soil as I would have hoped. And so that means that the containers dry out quite fast. So I will have to find some liners that fill these out a bit more so that I can have more soil and so that my plants can do a bit better next season. The reason I like to use liners in these is because these decorative planters are not frost hardy, and so I store them in my basement for winter. And to make them more lightweight, I prefer to use a liner that I can just remove, and it makes the pot really easy for me to move into my basement for winter storage. Now this beautiful sunflower is the chocolate cherry sunflower from Baker Creek Seeds. And I grew maybe about half a dozen seedlings, but they're so pretty, and I really love them. They have this dark color. Some of them have a bit more of an orange tone similar to the Autumn Beauty. And in looking up the seed, it looks like it takes 65 to 70 days from seed to bloom. Our last frost day is usually somewhere around Halloween. So sowing these seeds now, I'm hopeful that I will have some sunflower blooms between the first and second week of October that we can still enjoy before our first frost. And sunflowers are just such a beautiful late summer and fall flower that I'm really hopeful that these will actually germinate and bloom. Now I had some seedlings, some snapdragon seedlings that I had started with the winter sowing method that were really struggling because I left them in these small containers all of summer. So snapdragons generally like cooler temperatures, so they're more of a spring and fall bloomer in my zone 6. And so I didn't even bother with them over the warmth of the summer months. But now I thought, well, you know, I went ahead and had the trouble of winter sowing these, and they germinated, so I am going to see what happens if I plant them out. So I went ahead and I planted them, and I am keeping my fingers crossed that they will actually do a bit better now that they're in the soil with some biotone and some fresh compost, and that maybe we will see these lucky lips snapdragons bloom this fall. And another seedling that I started with winter sowing that was time to get in the ground was this perennial here. This is the Blue Glow Globe Thistle. And I actually started these from seed a few years ago, about 3 years ago now. And then last year I loved them so much that I collected some seed for my plant and I winter sowed them, and I was able to get a few more seedlings. I have about 4 that I had gotten. One of them died and I ended up with 3 at the end, and I'm getting those in the ground here. This is a beautiful perennial. I actually just showed it in my most recent video where I had done a little bit of a garden tour after I returned from vacation, and it was in bloom. It's a really vibrant kind of like blue color, and it's a globe shape, really pretty. They only get to be about 12 inches wide, so they're fairly narrow. So I thought that I would plant these 3 here pretty close to make a bit of a bigger drift of this perennial. And they get to be about 48 inches or so tall. So a great back of the border perennial. About once a week I go through and I spray a deer and rabbit repellent in my garden. Here the anemones, the bunnies we're after. We've had lots of bunnies this year. And I have some lilies, some Casablanca lilies that the deer also love to eat. So I've gone through and sprayed even my Bobo hydrangeas because in this bed I don't have any of those wireless deer spikes that I've been using. And I made a whole video about that, which I will also link below this video in the description. This invisible fence deer and rabbit seems to be working really well for me, but it is only as effective as the gardener. So I try to do it pretty regularly to make sure that my garden stays intact. Well, it was the perfect day to work outside. It was nice and cool and overcast most of the day, so I was able to get a lot of the weeding and deadheading done that I had been neglecting for some time. So it always feels good to be able to get out there and do those chores because it just makes the garden look so much better. So hopefully this provided you with a little bit of motivation. If you've been wanting to get outside and do a little bit of weeding and deadheading, but it's been too hot, try to find a cooler pocket of time in the day and you'll feel so much better, even spending 15 minutes and getting a little area done. Thank you for spending your time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the thumbs up button and please consider subscribing so you don't miss any of my future videos. And we'll see you soon.